Hi there. I welcome you once again to our WASSCE History TV. I must thank all of you for your support. I would also encourage you to continue to subscribe, send the share the link to your friends in other schools. Yes, today we have another interesting topic for us to look at. And today we are going to look at nationalist activities, even though we have looked at some of the early nationalist activities that were formed in the Gold Coast or in West Africa, especially in British West Africa. We have done a video on the National Congress of British West Africa, the NCBWA, and I also think I've done another video on the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, and I think you can go and check. I'm sure, very sure of that. Now, those nationalist activities that I just mentioned were formed around the First World War, during the First World War. And we said that nationalism in the context of West African history was a situation whereby the people in West Africa, even though they belonged to different ethnic groups, came to see themselves as one people fighting a common goal that is to liberate themselves from exploitation and other colonial, other colonial activities which they felt or the people felt were not good for them. But it is interesting to note that the first type of nationalism that began in West Africa, that historians term as proto-nationalism, in that particular nationalism, the people were not, or the West Africans were not demanding for a total end to colonization, but they were actually demanding for participation, especially with regards to the elite, the educated elite. They were actually demanding for trimming of the rough edges, of the colonial administration, so that it could allow them, the educated elite, to be part of the colonial system. And so that kind of nationalism was quite, modest. It wasn't that radical and all of that. But after the Second World War, between 1945 to 1957, that we are going to look at, after the Second World War, nationalist activities took a different turn altogether. There was an increased nationalistic feeling in West Africa during those times. And the factors for that increased nationalism in West Africa after the Second World War is what today we are going to discuss about. And so today, the subtopic is factors that influence the rise of increased nationalism after the Second World War. So this type of nationalism, as historians will call the radical or the mass or militant nationalism. In this type of nationalism, the Africans were actually demanding for an end to colonial rule. 1945, after the Second World War, because the World War or the Second World War came with it an enlightenment to both the educated elite and even some of the soldiers who also took part in the war for their colonial masters. So we're going to look at the factors that led to that increased nationalism, that militant, mass, radical, now demanding for self-rule, self-determination, and all of that. We are going to look at the factors that led to that. So let's look at our lesson objectives. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to discuss the factors that influenced the rise of increased nationalism after the Second World War. And there is a WASSCE question which also says, discuss the main grievance of Ghanaians immediately after the Second World War. And this is the same thing. You know, they are just asking you for the factors that we are going to discuss today. So let's begin with the introduction. I think I have already given you a little bit of introduction. Let's see. The intensity and dynamism moved into a higher gear with the return of the Ghanaian soldiers who fought on the side of the British government against Germany, her allies, after the Second World War. So, as I said, the soldiers were introduced, or the war introduced them to certain dynamics, which we shall look at. And so, that intensity, they came with that intensity, you know. And we are seeing that nationalism changed drastically after the World War II, and it was described as radical because nationalist activities no longer took the form of protest movements, as we had seen in the formation of the Aborigines, the Gold Coast Youth League, the NCBWA, and other things. Instead, it was largely militant, as nationalists adopted such radical methods: strikes, demonstration, and boycotts. These were the method that the nationalists adopted. Now, they were not into constitutional diplomacy, you know, Georgia, but they were actually using strikes, demonstration, and boycotts of British or European goods. We won't buy any European goods. We will demonstrate. We will not go to work, among others, to press home their demand for political independence for the people of the Gold Coast. And so this is what I've already discussed with you with regards to the introduction, the change, you know, the change, the gear, as we say, a higher gear, you know. So let's move on to the factors that brought about this change. Now, these factors that influence the rise of nationalist activities have been grouped into two. We have the external factors, and then we have the internal factors. So the external factors speaks to events that occurred outside the West African territory. That is what the external factors are. And then the internal factors are events especially that occurred or that happened within the Gold Coast, to be specific, even though there were other specific events that happened in each of the British colonies, but I'll zero in with that of the Gold Coast as a case study, because the Gold Coast, as we know today, as Ghana, was the first African nation, sub-Saharan, to gain independence. So I'll use that as a case study. So let's look at the external factors, things that happened, you know, outside the African continent, that brought with it that increased nationalism, that made the people to feel that we must demand for total end to colonization. Okay, so let's look at that. The first one was the proclamation of the Atlantic Charter. You know, after the World War II, there was a charter or an agreement which was signed in the US, Atlanta. And in this charter, you know, if you look at the causes of the Second World War, it was basically due to nationalism. You know, people, you know, of course, wanting to be free, wanting to determine their own fate, but somebody somewhere is also not interested in that, and you know, so attacking them. So the cause of the World War II was mainly due to nationalistic feelings, you know, with the Serbs and co. So after the war, there was this charter, this agreement signed between the British president at that time, Franklin Roosevelt, as you have seen his image over there, and the British Prime Minister, of course, Winston Churchill. His image is also there. These two people on a battleship off the Canadian coast, you know, of course, during the war, declared that the right, so this is the charter, the right of all peoples to choose the form of government under which they will live, and also express the desire to see sovereign rights and self-government restored to those who have been forcibly deprived of them. So in this charter, all what Franklin Roosevelt and Churchill is saying is that, yes, anybody whose sovereign rights, any country, whose sovereign rights and self-government has been taken away from them forcefully, taken away from them, should be given back to them. Because they were addressing the root cause of the World War II, which I have said was due to nationalism around the Bosnia and Herzegovina area, the Serbia, around those areas. So in order to prevent that war, if that has been denied of anybody, sovereign right, self-government has been denied, taken away from any group of people, it should be given to them. And the interesting thing is that at that time, the educated elite, they knew issues that were happening internationally. And so when they heard this charter from the then president of the United States and the then prime minister of British, they said, this is what we want. Give us our independence because of the charter, because Churchill and Roosevelt have stated that any group of people, any persons whose sovereign rights have been taken away from them or self-government have been taken away from them forcefully, they should return it. So therefore, we are basing on that charter, give us independence. You get the argument raised by the educated elite. Good. Another external factor which also brought about an increase in nationalism has to do with the broken myth. There was so much myth surrounding the Europeans. And I won't blame the people so much. There was this myth called the die myth. Psychologically, Africans were made to feel, they felt so inferior to the extent that they thought that the white man did not even die or could not die. They saw the white man as a superior person who was above everything. That sometimes you could perceive somebody in some kind of way to the extent that when a person does something, you're like, why you? I wasn't expecting this from you. And the moment you see the person in that mood, you realize that your respect for that particular person reduces because you were not expecting that from him. You saw the person to be, this high type of guy, only to be told that, or only to hear that, or only to see that, oh no, he's a nobody. So that is, of course, what happened. During the war, African soldiers fought alongside the whites. African soldiers were recruited to Burma, to Kenya, Ethiopia, Europe, and other areas to go and fight. And these African leaders actually fought alongside the white soldiers. Okay, and so in the course of the war, the African soldiers realized that, wow, the whites that we thought were superior and so, superior to us, really do not have any exceptional qualities. They are just like us. And there were even instances where the African soldiers were more, efficient, were more brave even than the white soldiers. You understand? And every soldier, if you're a soldier, of course, your respect comes from how brave you are. But these African soldiers who fought alongside the Europeans saw that most of even the Europeans were cowards. After all, you people, you are even nobody, you are cowards. And so, that myth was broken, that these people are nobody. Aside that, there were also other Ghanaian soldiers who also rose up, to become army officers. who actually had under their command white soldiers in the course of the war. Example of such person was Seth Anthony, who actually rose up, became an army officer, had white soldiers, under his command, commanding white soldiers. So after the war, the soldiers or the ex-service soldiers came back or returned from the war, and they came back with this perception that, oh, this person is no good, that person is, these white, they are nobody, we can sack them and all of that. And so they were ready to fight them. That is the whole point. They were ready to fight them. And if we read a book like Weep Not Child, I think so, yes, Weep Not Child, it's very funny how the soldiers described, the white. I think there was a part where they were having the guy was in a barber shop, of course, shaving the hair, and he was like, oh, as for the white, they are nobody, even their girls, they slept with the white girls, and they felt that there was nothing too special, about the white people, So all those things, all those myths, all those superiority myths, of course, surrounding the white were all broken. Good. So I think, and then we also have the last one, I guess, the formation of Negro movements. Also, Negro movements. Negro means black person. And so after the war, there were also the Negro movements, like, of course, the nationalist movement that we talked about. An example of such movement was the West African Students' Union in London, the WASSCE, which they were also calling for self-government within 5 years after the war for all the British West African countries. They also had a tremendous impact on the nationalist struggle in the Gold Coast, because the West African Students' Union were actually students who were studying, West African students who were studying in the US, and they formed this union, and they were calling for a tremendous end to colonization within 5 years. And so the nationalists who were at home in the West African territories were empowered by this movement, and I'm sure the movement also supported them in diverse ways. The last one has to do with the stance of the USA and the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And these two powerful countries emerged as powerful nations after the World War II. And the USSR, of course, was declined, and now we call them the Russia, or now they are called, of course, Russia. So, in essence, Russia and the USA also emerged as superpowers for different reasons, and who also, for different reasons, advocated for decolonization. So these two countries became the world power in those days, And so these two countries, for their own, for national interest, they also demanded for an end to colonization. And so if the world power is saying end colonization, I think you have nothing, of course, to say than to end it. So through the UNO, they put a lot of pressure on the colonies like Great Britain, France, and co to give independence to all their colonies. And that also, and then, of course, for example, the USA wanted Britain to give independence to her colonies because she was not ready to fight in protection of British colonies. And the USSR also declared 1948, of course, February 21, as the day for struggle against colonialism. And so you saw that the British were getting support from the USA, in times of war, but the US told them they must give them independence. If not, they are not ready. They will not be ready to support them anymore. Then also, another external factor was the independence of the Asiatic states. So in Asia, states like Burma, India, Indonesia, and other countries that were under the British rule or that were under colonization also got their independence after the Second World War. You understand? And so if we are all having the same colonial master, and you, Indonesia or India, you have been able to gain your independence from them, then I can also gain my independence. So that also gave the African nationalists, an inspiration to continue with the fight for independence. Good. So I hope you are okay with the external factors, about 4 or 5 of them: the stance of the USSR, the broken mate, also the independence of the Asiatic states, the Atlantic Charter, and other things. And I hope you can be able to explain them all. Now let's look at the internal factors. We zero in down to internal grievances of Ghanaians. Certain things that were happening, going on in the colony, in the Gold Coast, the people or the Gold Coasters were not happy about it. And that was the grievance right after the Second World War. They were not happy, and so because of that, they were demanding for an end to colonial rule. The first one was unemployment and failure to honor, of course, promises. Now, the war led to a forcefully, of course, recruitment of thousands of Ghanaians to fight on foreign fronts. On their return home, these veterans were hard hit by unemployment. On their discharge from the military, the soldiers, however, were given very attractive promises concerning their upkeep after the war. After the war, the British refused to honor their promises. As a result of this unfair treatment, the 3 ex-servicemen, Sergeant Ajete, Corporal Atipo, Private Odate Lamte, were shot dead by the police officer at the castle called Emery. So you see, before the Second World War, when the recruitment process started, the British promised, or the colonial masters promised the African soldiers a lot of things. They were, if you come, we'll give you jobs, we'll build you houses, we even give you money to marry, we'll take care of you, and all of that. But after the war, all those promises were not fulfilled. And so these ex-servicemen then decided to march on to the Christianborg Castle to put a petition, to the government that this is what we were asked for, but we did not get them. We are not. We've come back from the war and we are hit by unemployment. We have nothing to do. And on their way, of course, the policeman Emery stopped them. They didn't stop. Then he shot through the ex-servicemen, and 3 of them died on the spot. And those are the Sergeant Adete, Corporal Atipo, and Odate, Private Odate Lamte. And so, after the shooting incident, the news, broke up, and then, of course, people started to agitate and all of that. We will look at that in the 1948 route later. There was also a shortage and price hike. So the post-war saw the shortage of basic goods, of course, such as soap, milk, sugar, which had always been imported. These basic goods, soap, milk, and sugar, had always been imported from Europe. However, during the war, the colonial powers concentrated on the production of armament and other military accoutrements to support the armed forces. The shortages led to the price hike beyond the purchasing power of the people. This fueled the demand for independence, as the colonial government was seen as unable to meet the needs of the people. So, the factories that were, manufacturing these basic commodities stopped. They were now instructed to manufacture firearms for the, military for the war. And so the factories that were manufacturing these basic commodities in Europe had to stop, but rather go in to the manufacturing of firearms. And so there was this, of course, basic commodity was scarce, and therefore the price, shot up really high. As today, the things have shot up as a result of so many things. So the people could not buy. It was beyond their purchasing power. They could not buy, and that also was also added to their, of course, grievance. Of course, that made them to demand for independence. So these were the 3 ex-servicemen who were killed, people who fought in the war, and in presenting their petition to the British governor, they were shot, and instantly these 3 people died as you have seen their name there. So let's continue with the internal, of course, factors. The next one was that they also, of course, wanted to see democratic ideals practiced in Ghana. Okay, so the educated elite wanted to see democratic ideals practiced in Ghana because these people had been exposed to a lot of things outside, outside the country. They've schooled in some in the US, of course, some in Britain and all of that. And they had seen democracy being practiced, especially in the USA. And so they wanted to see the same. Again, the soldiers were also made to believe that, the Western allies, whether that's the Britain, France, and USA, were engaged in the war to free the world from Germany and Japan, of course, racism and imperialism. So the propaganda that the Europeans, gave to the soldiers, that they recruited was that, you know what, we are fighting against a very wicked country. They are even wickeder than us. If you don't help us to fight them and we allow them to defeat us, you are going to also be treated, of course, cruelly. Okay, so they were made to believe that they were fighting for freedom. They preached the ideals of democracy, liberty, and fundamental human rights. That if we don't fight against Germany and his allies, of course, Japan and co., you will not be free. You understand? So help us to fight against them. That was propaganda. It was not true. So on their return home, of course, what happened was that the soldiers did not see these ideals in operation, but strongly felt that they should be practiced in Ghana, for it is where these were the very ideals for which they had sacrificed their lives for on other foreign lands. So if you are fighting to free yourself from, or you are telling me to help you to fight to free yourself from colonial rule or from Germany, and then after the war you tend to also, colonize me, then there is a problem. There was this account that I heard from one of the soldiers for the returnees who said that when they were in India, of course, one Indian soldier asked him, "What are you fighting for?" And then the returnee said, "I'm fighting for freedom," because that's what he has been told. "I'm fighting for freedom." Then he said, the soldier asked him, "Are you yourself free in your country?" He said, "Wow, they have told you are fighting for freedom, but you are not free. They have not left you." So you get the irony over there. Good. Let's look at other grievances which I prefer to put there so that you can just have them in mind. Discrimination in the civil service. Of course, only the Europeans were preferred, in the workings or in the colonial administration. Most of the West Africans were discriminated, and that was also a grievance that made the people of West Africa to demand for total liberation. Again, foreign domination of the economy. The Syrians and the Lebanese had, of course, taken over the economy, the retail trade. Of course, they were relegating the Ghanaian to the background. These were some of the reasons. Again, exploitation of natural resources from the country. The British were, exploiting our gold and all of that, exploiting all those things for their own selfish, being, and we felt that these things were not right, and so we should actually, end, of course, colonial rule. But it is also quite interesting to also note that these very same things that our forefathers fought for are still happening today. Our minerals are still being exploited. Our timber, our gold, our diamond. Of course, recently, quite recently, just look at what happened in Apiate. That mining company is actually a Canadian company, but just look at what they did to our people. They paid nothing. Nobody was charged for anything. We are not benefiting from the gold, but yet we are still, like suffering from the activity. It's quite sad, and the Lebanese are still here, And this discrimination thing, we are also doing it to ourselves, whereby we discriminate based on people's ethnic, background and all of that. It's quite sad. I think we need a change of mind as a country if we really want to move forward. Good. Today has been a very interesting topic, educative one for that matter. This was a WASSCE May-June question which came 2013, the main grievances of Ghanaians immediately after the Second World War. Well explained, and I tell you, you are going to get your A. If you have any question, my number is down on the slide. You can call me, you can of course WhatsApp me, subscribe to the page, encourage your friends to also subscribe and share. Thank you.